Growing up in Flagstaff, Arizona, I thought I knew what a quiet life looked like. Pine trees lining the roads, snow on the San Francisco peaks in winter. My father grilling burgers on Saturday afternoons while my mother sat on the porch reading, her iced tea sweating rings onto the armrest. It was ordinary and it was mine, and I never once thought to be grateful for it, until it was gone. My father died on a Tuesday. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to funeral was 11 weeks. I was 19, a sophomore at Northern Arizona University, and I drove home that first weekend with a bag full of textbooks I never opened. My mother didn't cry at the hospital. She cried 3 weeks later in the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle, holding a box of the granola my father used to eat every morning. I found her there and we stood together for a long time. Nobody bothered us. The years that followed were steady in the way that grief eventually becomes steady. My mother sold the house, too much square footage for one person, she said, and moved into a smaller place on the east side of town. I finished my degree in criminal justice, applied to the Army on a Wednesday afternoon, and shipped out to Fort Jackson in South Carolina the summer I turned 22. Basic training was the first time in years I didn't think about my father every single day. There was too much noise, too much movement, too many people telling me what to do and where to be and how fast to get there. By the time I made it back to Flagstaff for Christmas that first year, I was different in ways I couldn't fully explain, and my mother seemed different too. Lighter, somehow. Her laugh had come back. She had joined a book club. She mentioned a name casually, the way you mention someone you've been thinking about more than you want to admit. His name was Curtis. She'd met him at a church fundraiser. He was a contractor, she said. Did renovation work. Very handy. I was happy for her. I want to be clear about that. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and I was genuinely, completely happy for her. I met Curtis for the first time at Easter. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of handshake that lasts half a second too long. He called my mother sweetheart before the appetizers arrived. He asked me about the Army with what seemed like real interest. The bases, the training, where I'd been stationed, and when I answered, he nodded in a way that suggested he was already forming opinions he didn't plan to share. Over dinner, he told a long story about a renovation job in Sedona that had gone sideways because of a difficult client. He was funny about it. Charming, even. My mother laughed. I smiled and refilled my water glass and told myself I was being paranoid. They got engaged 8 months later. My mother called me on a Thursday night, her voice pitched high with a kind of giddy nervousness I hadn't heard since I was a kid. She said he'd proposed at a restaurant downtown. She said the ring was beautiful. She asked me if I was happy for her. I said yes, because I was, because I wanted to be. The wedding was small. Immediate family, a few friends, a garden ceremony at a bed and breakfast outside of Sedona. I stood beside my mother at the altar, and I watched the man she was marrying, and I thought, he's going to take care of her. That's what I thought. I told myself that was enough. The first sign came that same night. We were back at my mother's house, Curtis's house now, technically, since he'd moved in 2 months prior, and I was helping clear the table while my mother changed her shoes. Curtis was pouring himself a drink at the kitchen counter. He didn't look at me when he spoke. You know, he said, your mother doesn't need you checking in on her every 5 minutes. She's got me now. I stopped moving. I'm just helping clean up, I said. I know what you're doing. He finally looked at me. There was nothing aggressive in his face. That was the thing that got me. He looked completely calm, like he was explaining a simple fact. You've been hovering all day. She notices it. It makes her anxious. I didn't say anything. He turned back to his drink. You've got your own life, he said. Go live it. I drove back to my apartment that night with my hands tight on the wheel, running the conversation back through my head, trying to find the part where I'd misunderstood. I couldn't find it. But I also couldn't find the part where I could tell my mother without sounding like a jealous daughter who couldn't handle sharing her. So I said nothing. Over the following months, I watched small things change. My mother stopped calling as often. When we did talk, she sounded careful, the way you sound when someone is in the room and you don't want them to hear. She stopped mentioning the book club. She mentioned Curtis constantly. He was redoing the bathroom. He was thinking about a new truck. He thought they should take a vacation to Florida in the spring. I was stationed at Fort Bragg by then, working in military intelligence, and I was busy enough that I could convince myself things were fine. I visited at Thanksgiving. Curtis shook my hand at the door with the same half-second grip and then disappeared into the garage for most of the afternoon. My mother and I sat at the table and talked, and she laughed at all the right moments, but there was something behind her eyes I didn't recognize. Exhaustion, maybe, or something more like defeat. In January, she mentioned, almost as an aside, that Curtis had suggested she put him on her bank account. For convenience, she said, in case of emergency. Just him? I asked. Or both of you together? She paused for a fraction of a second. Just the one account, she said. The main one. It's easier. I told her to talk to her bank before she signed anything. She said, of course, yes, she would. We moved on to other things. By March, I had started keeping notes. Dates, times, things she mentioned and then seemed to forget she'd mentioned. The bank account. The fact that she'd sold her car. Curtis thought it made more sense to share his, and didn't seem to have access to it on the days he took it to job sites. The way she'd stopped mentioning her sister who lived in Phoenix and who she used to call every Sunday like clockwork. I called my aunt directly. She picked up on the second ring. I've been waiting for someone to call me, she said. She wasn't surprised. She was tired. She told me she tried to visit twice, and both times Curtis had reasons. It wasn't a good time. She told me my mother had canceled their Sunday calls, said she was just so busy. She told me she'd sent a card for my mother's birthday, and my mother had called to thank her. Briefly, quietly, in the tone of someone reading from a script. Something is wrong, my aunt said, but every time I try to say that to her, she defends him. That's when I applied for emergency leave. I didn't tell my mother I was coming. I'd learned by then that Curtis had a habit of making himself available on days my mother knew I'd be calling. I wanted to see her, without the preparation. I drove from the airport to the house in a rental car, watching the familiar roads go by, and I felt something in my chest pull tight. She answered the door, and for a moment, just a moment, her face did something complicated. Relief and fear at the same time. Like she'd been hoping someone would show up and dreading it equally. Then she smiled and said my name and pulled me in for a hug. And over her shoulder I could see Curtis standing in the hallway, watching me with that same calm, explanatory expression. Didn't know you were coming, he said. Surprise, I said. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I stayed for 3 days. I watched. On the first morning, my mother started to call her sister, and then put her phone down when Curtis walked in. On the second day, I offered to take her out for lunch, and she looked at him before she answered me. He didn't say anything. He just looked back at her. Maybe another time, she said. We have things to do. On the third night, after Curtis had gone to bed, I sat with my mother at the kitchen table, and I put my hand over hers and I said, You can talk to me. She was quiet for a long time. He loves me, she finally said. He does. She stopped. He just what? He has opinions, she said carefully. About how things should be. About what's appropriate. Mom. I know. Her voice went very small. I know how it sounds. Does he hurt you? She didn't answer right away, which was its own answer. Not the way you're thinking, she said finally. I flew back to Fort Bragg with a file on my phone full of notes, a name I planned to look up, and a feeling in my gut that had moved past worry into something harder. I spent the next several weeks doing what I knew how to do. Research. Background checks. Public records. Curtis had 2 prior marriages. I found that easily enough. The first wife had filed a restraining order, withdrawn it 6 months later. The second marriage had ended with a financial dispute that had gone to civil court. He'd lost. He'd also apparently renegotiated the terms quietly outside of court and walked away with more than the judgment had awarded him. He was very, very good at this. I contacted a domestic violence advocate organization based in Phoenix that my aunt had found a nonprofit that specifically helped women in financially controlling relationships. They were careful and methodical. They talked to me about patterns, about documentation, about what options existed and which ones were likely to backfire. They told me that calling the police without evidence rarely helped and often made things worse. They told me to keep building the file. I kept building the file. In May, my mother called me, and this time she sounded different. Not scripted, not careful. She sounded like herself, a version of herself I hadn't heard in almost 2 years. He took money out of my retirement account, she said. I got a notification on my phone. He didn't tell me. How much? She told me. It was significant. Enough to matter. I have an account he doesn't know about, she said. I opened it 3 weeks ago. I've been putting a little in each time. I closed my eyes. She'd been planning. Quietly, privately, in the small spaces he'd left her. I need help, she said. But I need it to be right. I need it to stick. I know, I said. I've been working on it. We talked for 2 hours that night. I walked her through everything I'd compiled. She added details I hadn't known, bank statements she'd photographed, a recording she'd made on her phone one evening when he'd come home angry, 2 emails she'd forwarded to a new address he didn't know existed. She had been building her own file. We'd been doing the same work without knowing it. The advocate organization connected us with a family law attorney in Flagstaff. The attorney reviewed everything we gathered and said, in the precise, measured tone of someone who had seen a great deal and was no longer surprised by any of it, that we had enough to move forward. The financial misconduct alone was actionable. Add the recording and the picture was very clear. We set a date. The plan required timing. My mother needed to be out of the house before anything was served, because the advocate and the attorney both agreed that the moment Curtis was served, there was a window of unpredictability. Men like this, they explained, men who had built entire systems of control, sometimes went very quiet when those systems collapsed. Sometimes they didn't. I requested leave. It was approved. I flew back to Flagstaff on a Thursday. My mother had packed 2 bags over the previous 3 weeks, moving things incrementally, a document here, a photograph there, so that nothing looked obviously missing. She was calm in a way that took courage. I know that now. At the time, I just kept moving. We were in the driveway, her bags in the trunk of my rental car, when Curtis came out the front door. He had his phone in his hand, and he looked from my mother to me, to the car. Something shifted in his face. Not the calm, explanatory expression I'd come to know. Something underneath that. Something older. "Where are you going?" he said. My mother turned around and faced him. She thought about this moment, I could tell. She'd rehearsed it in the way you rehearse things you're afraid of. "I'm leaving," she said. "My attorney will be in touch." He took 3 steps toward her. I stepped between them. He stopped. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me the first night of the wedding. Assessing, recalculating. "This is between me and your mother," he said. "She's in my car," I said. "So it's between you and me." He stood there for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then he took out his phone and made a call. His attorney, presumably, because that was who men like Curtis called when their system started to fail them. My mother and I got in the car. I pulled out of the driveway. I watched him in the rearview mirror, standing in front of the house, talking into his phone, getting smaller. Neither of us said anything for a long time. "You okay?" I finally asked. "No," she said, "but I will be." The legal process took the better part of 6 months. It was not clean or simple or satisfying in the way that resolution looks from the outside. There were continuances and counterfilings in a period of about 3 weeks when his attorney made arguments that required our attorney to respond to arguments, and it was exhausting in the specific way that bureaucratic processes are exhausting. Not dramatic, just grinding. My mother stayed with my aunt in Phoenix during most of it. I called every few days. She sounded better each time. Tired, but clearer. The financial judgment came through in October. Curtis was ordered to repay what he'd taken from the retirement account, plus additional amounts the court identified from a year's worth of financial records. His contracting business was audited. 2 of his former clients, it turned out, had their own complaints pending. The civil case attracted the attention of a state financial crimes unit. I don't know exactly what happened after that, and I don't need to know. What I know is this: my mother got her name back on her own account. She got her car back. She got her Sundays with her sister back. She started going to the book club again, and the first time she called me from the parking lot afterward, laughing about something one of the other women had said. I had to put the phone down for a second and just breathe. There are things that took longer. The version of my mother who hesitates before she answers a question, who looks at the door when someone raises their voice. That woman didn't disappear the day the judgment came through. Probably she won't disappear entirely. That's not how this works. But there's something else, too. Something I didn't expect. My mother started volunteering with the same nonprofit that had helped us. Saturday mornings, she answers calls. She told me she doesn't give advice. She just listens. She just says, "I hear you. I know how it sounds. You can talk to me." I think about the moment she packed those 2 bags over 3 weeks, moving things one at a time so nothing looked missing. I think about the photographs she saved, and the emails she forwarded, and the account he didn't know about. I think about her standing in the driveway, turning around to face him, and I think that nobody taught her how to do that. She already knew. She was just waiting until she could. My father used to say that the people who scare you the most are usually the ones standing right next to you. He meant it about the world in general. He was a careful, watchful man. But I think about it differently now. I think he was right, and I think the corollary is also true. The strength that saves you is usually standing right next to you, too. You just have to stay close enough to find it. I've thought a lot about what made Curtis possible, not who he was. I understood that part clearly enough by the end. I mean, what made the whole situation possible. The conditions that let it grow, unnoticed, for as long as it did. Part of it was love. My mother loved my father deeply, and when he died, she was left with a quiet that had no bottom to it. Curtis understood that. Men like him always understand that. They find the empty space and they step into it carefully, and they are patient in a way that feels like devotion until it doesn't anymore. That's not a failure of my mother's intelligence. It's a failure of what grief can do to the part of you that's supposed to stay guarded. But here's what I keep coming back to. The moment she opened that second account, the one he didn't know about, everything changed. Not because the money itself was the solution. It wasn't. But because she made a decision in secret, on her own terms, for her own future. That decision required her to trust her own judgment again. And once you start doing that, once you make one move that belongs entirely to you, the next one gets easier. She was building herself back before I even knew she needed it. I think about my own role in this, and I am not comfortable with all of it. I miss things. I told myself she was happy when I should have asked harder questions. I filed away the things that fell off and called it paranoia, which is what you do when the alternative, that someone you love is in real trouble, is too heavy to carry while you're stationed 1,200 miles away and trying to do your job. I don't say that to excuse it. I say it because I think it's worth being honest about the ways we talk ourselves out of knowing things we already know. What I understand now, years past the judgment and the audit and the Saturday morning phone calls from a nonprofit parking lot, is that clarity costs something. It costs the comfort of believing everything is probably fine. It costs the ease of not looking too closely. My mother paid that price. My aunt paid it. I paid it eventually, when I couldn't not look anymore. Curtis paid it too. Differently. And by his own choices. He had spent years building a system designed to make one person smaller so he could feel larger. Every account he put his name on, every call she didn't make, every Sunday she spent inside instead of talking to her sister. Each of those was a brick he laid. He built that wall himself, and when it came down, it took everything he'd constructed with it. That's not poetic justice. That's just how it works. When your entire life depends on another person shrinking, you are one act of courage away from having nothing. My mother is not a small person. She never was. She just needed enough space to remember that. I think that's the thing I want to hold on to. Not the legal outcome, not the financial recovery, not even the Saturday calls. Though I love those calls more than I can say. I want to hold on to the image of her packing those 2 bags over 3 weeks, one item at a time, so nothing looked missing. Moving quietly. Planning carefully. Trusting that the moment would come and being ready for it when it did. That took intelligence. The kind that doesn't announce itself. It took ethics, knowing what was right and refusing to stop believing in it, even when refusing was hard. And it took a kind of endurance I'm not sure I fully have myself, the ability to stay steady inside a situation that was designed to make you doubt everything, and to keep moving toward the door anyway. She found her way out. I just helped her carry the bags.